Welcome to the Heart of Soul podcast, an exploration of who you are, and why you are, offering new ways to investigate age-old questions at the heart of you. Greetings, it's Joseph, and thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. We promised to get to the spiritual buffet issue, but it may not surprise you that we needed to lay down some context first. So in today's episode, Stace presents my absolute most favorite aspect of Edenity, and yes, that is absolute truth, at least for the moment, the 9 elements of any paradigm. These apply to all philosophies, models, religions, spiritualities, etc., and is a powerful tool to augment your consciousness quotient, or CQ. It will radically change the way you look at your world, I promise. Related to this, I'll remind you to listen to these podcasts from the beginning and in order. It's particularly important here because this episode is a challenging one to swallow for most people, and if you haven't gathered this already, we take no responsibility for any offense this may cause you, and you listen to us at your own risk. Thanks for listening. It's good to be back here, and as promised, we're going to go into the spiritual buffet issue. But before we dive into the spiritual buffet issue, it was Stace's idea to briefly, in quotation marks, talk about the yes. 9 elements of the paradigm. How do you want to set us up with that?
Well, since we're not as a species very well conditioned to think paradigmatically, we think many levels lower than that, where we have no trouble mostly articulating our beliefs and our biases and our frustrations, but we're not taught to think to ever investigate what paradigm do I really hold. For those who are rabidly into certain religionisms, that's easy. Well, my paradigm is born-again Christianity, or my paradigm is Buddhism. I actually had a woman once, Joseph, who was presenting her views on parenting. And I was in the seminar, and she started out by saying, I just want everyone to know here, I hold no paradigms whatsoever about my work, on my opinions about what good parenting is and what bad parenting is.
She claimed she had no paradigm about good or bad parenting?
Yes, because a paradigm is limiting, and she was free of paradigms while she was going to offer her version of parenting, a good parenting model. Well, the most my love for humanity could do at that time was chuckle. Yeah. And I did raise my hand. I stopped her right at the beginning after that sentence and says, can you please explain that? I don't think you can be outside of a paradigm if you have a value system.
Checkmate.
And she said, well, value system, something like that, I remember. And I said, well, good, bad, good parenting, bad parenting, there's values associated with that, right? Mm-hmm. And she just sort of stood there like deer in the headlights for a moment. And there was a beautiful, sad example of how paradigm poor our consciousnesses are, and aware, we're not self-aware of what paradigm has been conditioned into us. Yeah. We think it's our second nature and it's our view, but 80% of our paradigms that we're not taught to investigate are conditioned into us, and we think they're ours, and they're not. They were put into us artificially.
Yeah. Now, Stace and I have been talking from the 9 elements of a paradigm since we began.
That's true. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
And so we may want to actually talk about that. We can take an hour and a half for this, and that's, I think, would be fine. And I think we have to cover 9 elements of a paradigm anyway. And I want to say the 9 elements of the paradigm is, I don't want to reduce your teaching in such a way.
Reduce it away. It
is the most simple, elegant, and ingenious aspect to me of all of your teaching. And here's why. Because it's actually somehow independent of your paradigm. It's an aspect, it's a paradigmatic assertion or a metaphysic that has the power to help all paradigms in the past and in the future, and is independent of the paradigm. And it shocks me every time I think about it, why we didn't get taught this in 6th grade, because it's so elementary in one way.
Yeah, these are the elements we're going to talk about here, Joseph, are the elements of all paradigms. And this is also for Edenity's paradigm. We could sift through, pour through the paradigm of identity, a paradigm of Edenity through all these 9 elements.
Yeah.
So it applies to all paradigms, not just Edenities. But as you say, it's a meta element of the paradigm of Edenity that tells us, guides us in how to look through all of our systems.
To me, the answer to the question why, if this is so obvious, which I think our listeners will see, why is this not understood? That's a really fascinating question for me. And that is the nature of what I call extreme subjectivism. And we could go all the way back to the invention of the printing press here, where just like you were talking about with that teacher, where there's a conditioning in our society right now that tells us that having a paradigm is bad because that's an objective set of moral standards by which we're supposed to live. And that has routinely caused abuse of power and all sorts of other mischief in our world. So let's try living without paradigms. Record scratch, like what? Well, that alone would be a paradigmatic assertion. Let's not have it. You can't escape paradigms, like I learned from you.
Yeah, a no path is a path. A no paradigm is a paradigm. We can't escape it. Paradigms are the only thing that allows us as human beings endowed with mental bodies to orient and framework what human life is all about. So it's utterly impossible for any human being to not have a paradigm. The most that they can do is be unconscious of it.
And that alone, that's a potentially very offensive statement for someone. And I'll tell our listeners this, because what this model will give you the power to do is to see other people's paradigms better than they do.
Yes.
And that scares the hell out of people, because when you can see the paradigm, I had a martial arts teacher once that said, if you can see the path that they're on, you'll be able to see which way they'll turn.
Yes, exactly.
And it's a similar kind of thing. If you can see the paradigm that someone is living in, you'll be able to predict their decisions, predict the mistakes. You can just, because you see the road that they're on in a 100-mile context. You can see where they're going to dead end.
Exactly right. And I must offer that thinking paradigmatically in exactly the way that you just offered, surely it saves a shitload of time in evaluating other teachings. It takes me less than 30 seconds reading a website to know the paradigm they're coming from. And paradigms can be ranked in order of their distortabilities. All paradigms are like a lens through which we experience life, and we can never get around them. We can never get around them. So it's best to know what lens we're looking through, even especially when we're in denial that we're looking through one.
Yeah, and why that there's the question for anyone who is feeling still resistant to the idea of having a paradigm. I would invite them to consider, well, what's wrong with having a paradigm? Where did you get that idea?
Right. That's instructive right there. Yes, Joseph.
Because you're about to find out, if you keep listening, exactly what your paradigm is. And you'd think that people would know, but when I look back at where I was living in my 20s and a little bit after that, no, I had no idea what my paradigm was. I was a spiritual buffet artist, which is what we're eventually going to get to. But I guess we should start with the 9 elements.
Yeah. One more footnote before we go is I just want to address an elephant in the paradigmatic room, in that in our now PC politically correct paradigmized media world, it has gotten to the point, which is why this conversation is really helpful, that there's been a democratization of all belief systems, that we're all just have different points of view, and there's no evaluative metric or rubric to classify a certain belief system as, let's say, less than sophisticated. And so a Shiite Muslim, radicalized Muslim, who believes he's going to have sex with 72 virgins at his beck and call after he murders infidels. Edenity in this current climate is equivalent to that paradigm, because everyone's got a right to what they believe.
Which is itself a paradigm that goes at least as far back as anthropology, which is 1851.
At least. So I just wanted to address that, because Edenity takes the stand and says not all paradigms are equivalent. Just because everyone has a right to believe whatever they want doesn't make what they believe in subjectively or objectively accurate.
Well,
flat earther, like a flat earther.
Right. And the confusion, I think, is in essence and expression one, right? It's like, at essence, everybody has the same worth.
Yes.
But if I have a leaky pipe, the plumber is more valuable to me than the carpenter or the bad plumber.
Yes.
And I get to stand with pride to say, you are better right now for me.
Yes.
Or you're the better plumber or whatever. And so, this over-democratization, it's a symptom of the extreme subjectivism, which I've been thinking a lot about related to the level of extreme woke consciousness stuff. I was just emailing with someone talking about, where did this come from academically, because there were the deconstructionists, the post-structuralists like Derrida and Jacques Lacan, who
postmodern philosophy.
Yes, right. Well, that's where the post-structuralists came out of postmodern, I believe.
Yes, right.
And so but all of that started with the invention of the printing press. Because of like, oh, look, my point of view is equal to the priest who's been interpreting this text for 1,000 years. Well, yeah, in one way, you have to decide what's right for you, and it's true that they've been oppressing you, so it's good that you've got your own copy of the Bible in German and all that, but it also might be that the person knows something you don't. And so we swung from the extreme objectivism of the Catholic Church oppression, and we're still swinging to extreme subjectivism. And today, I was emailing with this person, and they said that it's trending now in real estate. They're no longer calling master bedrooms. They're calling them primary bedrooms, because, the master word is too evocative of slavery. And that's a paradigm.
It is. That's right. Oh, God. One last point, I promise, and we'll dive into this. And that is that Edenity would mournfully offer that a radical Muslim's paradigm that they're going to get 72 virgins for murdering thousands of people is, I could say, unsophisticated at the top end and childish on the bottom end. With mournful heart, not negative, judgmental smugness. But the metaphor here is a 12-year-old can do as much damage with an Uzi as a 35-year-old.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea, there's so much muddy thinking and foggy perceptions around it, and politically correct overlays, that the whole paradigmatic system has become a real mishmash, meshugana. It just has.
We would say to that Muslim, of course, on the other side of things, is like they're dead ending a paradigm. They're doing what is true for them, that is appropriate for their soul age. So at the level of all of that, it's entirely true for them.
Yes. Yeah.
But not ultimately true. We would.
We would say it's true, but not real.
Yes.
Right. And I love that you brought that forward here, because contextually to our whole podcast today, I want to remind listeners that the offering of Edenity, of growth itself, is about sticking with what feels right to you until for you it dead ends.
Yeah.
Okay. And that dead end can come from hearing someone else talk about another paradigm, and you go, oh, I think I'm done with Catholicism, or whatever situation you're in. So you've got to stick with what feels right to you, and offer, if you want to live an examined life, you have to have curiosity about how attached you are to your paradigm. which is different than a belief system. So let's jump into that right now.
Yeah, please.
So Edenity offers there's 9 elements to every paradigm, even yours, even if you don't have a paradigm, and especially if you don't feel like you have a paradigm. One, there's a cosmology. The cosmology. No, let's start with the other way around.
Usually start with the cosmology and then cosmology after.
Let's start with it. The cosmology is the architecture of reality that that you are consciously or unconsciously abiding in. If you're a Christian, the architecture of reality is heaven, earth, and hell. That's the architecture of reality, and never the twain shall meet in any of those. You have one lifetime in the middle layer to get it right. And if you get it wrong, you go to hell, or if you get it right, you go to heaven. So there's an architecture of reality. Advaita Vedanta, his architecture of reality is witnessless beingness. Okay, that's all there is. There's no layers. It's witnessless beingness. For Zen, of course, it's non-duality, which is roughly equivalent to Advaita Vedanta that way. If you're a Mormon, of course, you have a heaven and hell thing, but boy, the way you live in the middle layer of earth is very different than a Scientologist would, or an atheistic secularist. Right?
Scientologist, yeah, Scientology. You want to do the Scientologist cosmology? Because there's this guy on another planet really far away. That's like,
well, that's the same with Mormons. That God is living on a physical planet.
I forgot about that, right?
Yeah, so there are some linkages between Mormonism and Scientology paradigmatically, right?
And I just want to add here on this first one, it's this one's usually fairly easy to discern, but it can be very tricky to discern what a paradigm's thing is for each one of these steps. Sometimes you have to really go digging. Like Judaism, for example, the metaphysics are really, really vague. And to find out, like, when we get to cause of suffering for that one, it's really hard to really pin down. But just because it's not pin downable or stated on some document doesn't mean it's there. And that's where the real sleuthing comes. Sometimes
it doesn't mean it's not there.
Yeah, sometimes you have to kind of intuit or piece together things to get to what that is.
Yeah, the Kabbalah is a good example of that. I'm glad you brought that up, because to try to get the cosmology of Kabbalic, what's the purest one? I forget. It's very difficult to sift it out. So the architecture of reality for an atheist, of course, all there is the physical reality, and of course, since consciousness is created by brain tissue, the afterlife is not, and it's lights out at death. For Edenity, the architecture is quite interesting. It has many levels of consciousness available to us in the bigger God field, as it's called. But we won't be going through all the elements and all the paradigms here, just the structure of it today, the spinal skeleton, the cosmology, the architecture that you're working with consciously or unconsciously. The second element is cosmogony. How did the current architecture of reality and perception, how did it come to be in the first place?
And I remember that word cosmogony is the same root as Genesis, beginning. That's how I remember that word.
Yes,
for our
cosmogenic. Yeah. Cosmogenic. What did it arise out of? Of course, for a secular humanist, it's the Big Bang, or an empiricist, it's the Big Bang. It's the 7 days of creation for Catholicism, Christianity in general. Every paradigm has how did things come about as to be what they are today.
And interestingly, I'm pretty sure Islam subscribes to the 7 days as well, because their metaphysics are sort of stacked on Christianity's.
Right. And of course, the cosmogony for Christianity is what it all happened that way. Not the second level of it. The reason it got so bad is that Eve decided that they should eat from the tree of self-knowledge, and this was she thought this was a sacred gift from God. The apple there is just a metaphor, of course.
Well, you just jumped to the cause of suffering. Isn't that the third one?
No, but I just wanted to say something about that. How did the cosmogony is, how did it get the way it is? The second level of that is, how did it become so bad where there's such a thing as hell when there wasn't a hell
right.
before?
Yeah, the relationship. Yeah.
Right.
So what you want to
Exactly.
look for in paradigms is what is the relationship between the cosmogony and the cosmology? What
That's
is
it.
it, and how
That's
did
it.
what it is come into being? Because the linkages between these 9 points are where the real magic is.
Exactly right. And as you just referenced, the third element of any paradigm is the cause of human suffering. Maslow would have one explanation for the cause of human suffering. Freud might have another. Christianity, of course, has the Garden of Eden's disobedience. Mohammedans have it to the degree they are not in total submission to Allah. Causes problems. It's total submission, 100% submission.
Well, with Islam, isn't it more? I did some digging on this a while back. Pride was the closest thing I could get to the cause of suffering in Islam.
Yeah, what I mean is the problem is you're not submitting with pride.
Yes.
That's what I'm saying.
Because the submission, Islam literally means surrender.
Surrender.
And that's the antidote to the pride that you have. But what's the cause of pride? Because you're not surrendered? It's kind of circular.
Yes, that's it. It's it's all on one latitude.
Oh, dear, I never really made that. See, that's a great example of how powerful this is. So it's a chicken and egg problem. Well, so okay, I'll have to process this later. That's a real trap.
Well, it's interesting because how did imperfect humans, from Muhammad's point of view, how did they acquire pride? That becomes the question then. Why
by not being surrendered?
By not being, it's a circular argument.
Exactly, circular argument. So they don't subscribe to the Genesis tree of knowledge debacle?
Because Abraham was the founding father, not so blurrily, the founding father of both Islam and Judaism. They were revered differently, revered as a really contributing prophet for Islam. But because of that, yes, they share a similar Old Testament Judaic Genesis
Islam's
story.
Considered an Abrahamic religion, I thought.
Well, not since Moses. Basically, the modern form, Judaism is more Abrahamish, but Christianity is more Mosaic. It was after the Ten Commandments came through that Moses sort of supplanted Abraham, and then off you went to the arm of Christianity from Judaism.
Okay, well, we're going down a rabbit hole of Joseph's personal curiosity. We better stop that. Otherwise, I'll get even real smaller.
So let's summarize the three that we just said. There's a cosmology, an architecture of reality, and perception. The cosmogony is where the cosmology or architecture came from. And then the next element is, what's the cause of human suffering?
As it relates to the first two, because it's going to be connected to the ology and the beginning of it. These
elements don't always resonantly relate to each other, which is a clue that the paradigm is not sober.
Incoherent. Yeah.
Incoherent. Let's say insober and be nice. I feel good today. In the end, this assay of paradigmatic elements is a rubric for determining the sobriety or insobriety of your paradigm. So if you say a Satan stuck his pitchfork in the first Mohammedan and said, "I've got a better deal for you. Pride is better than submission." Well, okay, that may or may not be acceptable because there is a Satan in Islam. Where did that come from and how? But the cause of human suffering is a big one, because that cause of human suffering determines then the next element. What is the fourth element is, what's the way offered by the paradigm to heal the cause of suffering? Good works or good dogma are the two twin ones for Christianity. There's the dogmatists, and then there's the good workers. Baptists tend to be the dogmatists, and Presbyterians tend to be the good workers. That's a little bit of an exaggeration, but
but
for Christianity,
it depends on the sect. There's so many different variations, but if you really nail them to the floor, you'll eventually get some clear answers vis-a-vis the 9 elements.
So that's really important in a paradigm, because if they offer the cause of human suffering, they also offer the solution to it. So that's the better way to say it.
And those two things are inextricably intertwined in a diagnostic kind of dynamic that is kind of lost on many people in general, especially, most of the diagnostics these days have to do with in Western medicine. And Western medicine doesn't do a whole lot of, the majority of Western medicine is treating the symptoms of something rather than actually curing an illness. And so there's a lot of conditioning that messes with our ability to think in terms of root cause, diagnosis, and solution, because all of medicine is not really based on that necessarily, even though it would say it is.
You bet. Okay, so in that vein, the fourth element is, what's their definition? What's a paradigm's definition of the ultimate state of human consciousness? And here's where it becomes fun to start rolling in Eastern esotericism to the conversation here, which we haven't talked much about. The cause of human suffering is, depending on the sect, for example, in Buddhism or Hinduism, desire, personal desire is a big bugaboo for them. Personal attachments to personal desire, over attachments, is the way that the state of consciousness as a goal, which is the next one, right? So, wait, let me just hang on here. Excuse me, my head just burped.
That's fine.
The way to heal suffering. Yeah. The way to heal suffering.
That's 4, right?
That's 4.
That's 5 is the ultimate goal.
Yeah. What's the ultimate goal? For Buddhism and Advaita Vedanta, for example, it's enlightenment, or what's the term, moksha in Advaita Vedanta. They're basically equivalent. And that's the exposure that the personal self has never existed, does not exist now, and will never exist. The breakthrough that you don't exist as a personal I is their ultimate state of consciousness, which is the goal of how do you heal human suffering, right?
Right, because the cause is over-identification with self and personal attachment, therefore realizing there's no I is the solution.
Exactly right. Very simple. Obey the 10 Commandments in Christianity and in Judaism mostly, and you'll go to heaven. That's the solution. Obey the commandments. Obey. Turn your whole personal will over to God. That's the way you get to the ultimate. And ultimate, though, for Christianity, the ultimacy isn't found here on earth. It's only found in heaven. At least Buddhism and Hinduism say that you can find it while you're here, for which they should be congratulated, at least. Yeah.
Right.
And for a Maslowian, self-actualization is the ultimate state of the top tier of human consciousness if you self-actualize.
Because the self is real. And
that's right.
It's completely secular. Mm-hmm.
Exactly right. Mm-hmm. So that's that element. Anything
One of the
to
things I find really fascinating when I talk about this with people is I'll just say it by example, that if someone is, say, on a Christian path where they're looking to, be saved, which is a lot of the language that many Christians would use, they want to be saved and, find the glory of God in heaven, that actually requires a subscription to that the Adam and Eve story was literally true.
Yes, literally true.
And the interesting thing is, I think I've seen surveys that something like 40% of Christians or more don't actually believe that Adam and Eve is a literal story. And that's a really big problem paradigmatically speaking, because it's like, okay, so if your commitment to Jesus is a reparation for the Adam and Eve thing, then the whole thing makes internal coherent sense.
Yes.
But if you don't believe Adam and Eve really happened, then what is the source of your original sin?
Yes.
And then you have this disconnect between the cause and the effect. And that's what we are talking about as insober. Or I actually think incoherent is kinder. But it depends on how you define it. It just doesn't cohere. It's not incoherent like foolish. Literally, it just doesn't cohere. It doesn't connect.
Right. And that's why cherry picking your elements of what you want to believe in your system and your paradigm is so detrimental to sobriety.
Right. And that's
which we'll get to later.
Yeah, because it's like, so when I actually was talking to someone about a month ago who was wrestling with their a divorce because he was brought up with a lot of Catholic conditioning, and he didn't want to get divorced because of that. And I said, I was being a little playful with him because it seemed to fit. I said, do you believe that Adam and Eve were like that actually happened? And he said, no. And I said, do you believe that, when the priest does his thing, that the wine actually turns into blood? And he said, no. And I said, well, I have some good news for you. You're not a Catholic, so you can get divorced.
Yes.
And that really made his head spin for a little while.
See, and so what a beautiful example, Joseph, of how unclear people are. Their conditioning goes so deep, it confuses the rational mind. There's no critical thinking about their belief system. Then for someone who doesn't believe in Adam and Eve, doesn't believe that Jesus was born with spermless birth, they're a Catholic, not a Catholic. They're addicted to Catholically to Catholicism.
This is. Can we connect that? Like, I don't know Christianity well enough, or Catholicism well enough, but believing that you can't get divorced comes from the over-authoritarianism of the church, the hierarchy in the church, where they said you can't get divorced because we need more members. Where does that come from?
No, being a recovering Catholic myself,
yes, you would know.
I'm forever recovering. I'm pretty much past it, but let's keep the AA terminology going here.
Which is also
I'm in recovery, right?
Uh-huh.
I'm also in recovery from guruism, which we had guruitis, actually, that disease, and we'll talk about that soon. Also,
next time, probably, yeah.
Yeah. So no, in Catholicism, the whole point of marriage is children.
It's a sacrament, right?
And so you're not. Lust is one of the 7 deadly sins, and so technically, if you're a true Catholic, you can't have lust without sinning, even with your wife. Now, your pastor of your church and maybe your bishop and maybe even your cardinal, but the Pope won't go there, might say that, as long as you love the parent, the Catholic Church has got some space here, but it doesn't dogmatically have that space, which is another proof of its insobriety, because it will enforce it sometimes and not other times. Yeah. Well, then what are you guys all doing there with all that gold in Vatican City? Do you know?
How do we connect? Can we connect that divorce thing all the way up to the top? That's what's really fun for me, if we can pull that off.
If the whole point of marriage is to procreate children, because that's what God wants, and God
be fruitful and multiply, right? That's in the Bible.
Be fruitful and multiply. That's it. That's basically where the addict ends up. Is it's a mandate from God to be fruitful and multiply. So you can't get divorced, and so all this religious overlay to marriage, and then in the secular society, it even goes into governmental contracting even secular governmental stuff has been conditioned by spiritual teachings on marriage. So it's all crazy that way. So does that make sense? Did I answer your question?
Yeah, and I just realized that the divorce thing actually would be covered under ethics or morals. That'd be further down. I'm getting ahead of ourselves.
Exactly right. Yeah. And that leads us to the next element, and that is a basic value system that defines good and bad. It may seem to most people that they have an innate natural sense of what's good or bad. And there's some overlap there. We all might say, well, some people might say suicide is bad and not suiciding is good. But if you had a terminal brain tumor or plaque on the brain such that like Robin Williams, that where he was losing his mind, his identity, and couldn't think linearly anymore, and he suicided. Who's to judge that suicide is bad in that case? In other words, a value system, to be a credible value system, can't find a whole lot of exceptions to its value system. Secular humanism, that's another whole podcast, for example, is based on relativism, and religious value systems are based on revelationalism, revelation from God. Whereas, well, in secular humanism, stealing some bread to feed your kid because they're sick is a different sin than stealing money from the bank if you want to buy a Ferrari. So they would their value systems would be a little adjudicative of the difference between those two, right? Mm-hmm. But the value system, and I don't separate these two. The value system is the belief system. So you could also say here, this next element is the beliefs in the values of the paradigm, right? And so it hits here where we think that there are collisions of belief systems in the world between Islam and Judaism, or between secularism and the Far Eastern esotericism. Really, they're collision of paradigms, because the belief system or the value system is part of the bigger paradigmatic skeleton. So it's not collisions of belief systems. That's just where the rubber meets the objective road. But it's actually further up the scale, collisions of paradigms, of points of view of the world.
I see what you're saying. Yeah, so the people experience the conflict at downstream levels. But it's sort of like, I remember once you were saying, like, there was in the news, this was, I don't know, 15 years ago or something, when a pope met with some prominent Islamic imam, and like, can you imagine the conversation? Like, each of them thinks the other is going to hell.
Yes.
How intimate a conversation can that really be? And they're not authentic. They're not authentically saying, hey, I think you're going to hell, you think I'm going to hell. Let's just talk about how we can get along here somehow. They don't do that. And so each of them is sort of standing back from their true selves, trying to negotiate some kind of, whatever.
It's crazy. I remember that example, and the most I could imagine them doing is, after they acknowledge the impossibility of any negotiation, they just, let's have some anisette, let's have a drink.
It might actually help.
Yeah. In that
relativize them.
Right. And that's why, bless his heart, he's certainly an improvement over the past Pope. But even the present Pope, Francis, he's big on ecumenism. Mm-hmm. But as you just are inferring here, the belief system, the value system of Catholicism, they could not, he knows, of all the people in the Catholic Church, the Pope knows the dogma best.
Sure. So
if he doesn't say, listen, patriarch, my stand-in there, not the imam, but maybe it's in the Russian Orthodox Church, Mm-hmm. I think we can agree on a lot of stuff. But if he's talking with an emir, he's got to say, you're going to hell. You are going to hell. He can't say that and be ecumenical. So the ecumenists, all this whole thing, let's find the common linkages between all of our belief systems. That's basically a nice thought, but it's an impossible reality if you stick to your dogmatic guns.
Right.
And if you don't stick to your dogmatic guns, then you're not a Catholic, or you're not an imam. You must stick to your dogmatics. That's part what your paradigm says. So you can't, on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, hold the dogmatics with no exceptions, and then go to an ecumenical synod and say, oh, what do we have in common with each other rather than what we have in different?
Right, which looks very altruistic, but it's an impossibility.
Yeah.
And the reason they're not doing it is because if they lived wholly in integrity with the tenets of their paradigm, it would dead end faster.
Yes.
And that's what they're trying to avoid, because they, somewhere in them, they intuitively get that, I don't think the blood actually turns into wine. There was this article, did you see, I don't remember if we were connected at the time, when there was this a group of nuns who were producing a gluten-free Eucharist.
Yes.
You remember this?
I do. Go ahead. Go ahead. And what were the problems they had?
Yeah, I mean, I don't remember exactly what the article was about, but I just remember being like, well, I mean, if you're really turning it into the body of Christ, then it doesn't matter if the receiver of it has a wheat allergy or a gluten allergy, does it? In other words, that you're having to produce a gluten-free Eucharist wafer means you're not actually producing the body of Christ because it's producing allergy responses. And then the whole paradigm falls apart right there.
Right.
It has to.
It's what we're saying here. And again, Joseph and I, and you'll see this if you look at the video of our podcast, but we're laughing, but though the laughing comes out of crying.
Yeah, it's not derision. It's
not derision. It's heartful outrage.
Yeah,
I'd like to say it that way.
That's pretty.
It's heartful outrage. It's wait. How can you live what you say is your deepest truth and contradict yourself so completely? And Buddhism would step in this case and say, well, look, your logical mind is blown. That's the whole point. So
God.
This is
insidious.
why Eastern esotericism is so smugly damaging the human soul and heart, is because anything that goes against, if you confront their contradictions, they will say, yes, of course it's contradictory. That's the whole point. And then the whole congregation, the whole satsang, they exhale and wonder, and oh my God, what a brilliant teacher,
Well, I have something to insert there. I heard Adyashanti once say, and he was my Zen teacher for a while, and I heard him say once that the confusion people encounter very often is when a Zen teacher says something to someone, they're not offering absolute truth. What they're giving you very likely is a strategy that is relevant to your awakening path, which makes sense and is true and can be a very slippery way to avoid having a paradigm.
And here's why. Let me enter the element that solves that whole equation. Right? What they say to a current seeker may be custom lasered to theirs. It's not absolute truth. This is for you. And I'm going to talk in a koan, so maybe you awaken to the next degree, right?
Yeah.
But what is never confronted, there is an absolute truth inherent to your teaching, and that is there's no such thing as the I. That's non-negotiable.
Yeah.
An enlightened teacher cannot say that is not an absolute truth, because their whole paradigm is based on the fact that the I is an illusion.
Yeah.
So that is non-negotiable. And that non-negotiability is the problem behind the innocent koanic offering, you see.
Oh, right. Because if there's no I over here saying this to you, and there's no I over there actually listening to it. So if this isn't the whole truth, it's kind of sort of fuzzes it all out. It doesn't really matter so much.
Well, let's take it again. Some heartful outrage. Let's take it one more step. I who have no I are going to offer you, who feels you have an I, not to have an I anymore. And if I'm successful, then my not I and your not I, even though they can't connect, will somehow bask in a mutual notness.
Yeah, well, connection will connect with itself and abide with abidance and all that.
Exactly right. And if they take that element, there's no reason to ever have satsang. Yeah. Because in the end game is I'm nobody, you're nobody, so there can be no relatedness. So what's the whole point of sitting here and talking about getting you enlightened? You see, this is a real problem. I've tried to bring this to a couple enlightened people, and they just change the subject fast,
Well, I did hear that Adyashanti said something like, I heard him say once that like one of the original traditions, maybe around the time of the Buddha or maybe after, was that there would be a coming together for 2 or 3 months of the year, and everybody's practice would be was assumed to be solo the rest of the year. But there are plenty of paradigms that are heavily Eastern influenced that are ashramic, right? Where everybody's living together all the time. Look at what Osho did. That was extremely social.
Yeah.
That's a lot of people in one place for no eyes ultimately existing.
Well, Edenity in this domain, which would be another whole podcast rabbit hole,
Yes.
Would offer that the Buddha would not hold any absolute truth, that there's no such thing as the I. He would say the I is co-arising in concert with the cathection of outside experience. So the I is wedded to outside experiences. So it doesn't exist as a noun, he would say, I would offer, but it exists as a verb that constantly is being reinforced by outside experience. And then, if unlike someone who asked this of what's her name, Eli Jackson Bear and Gangaji, someone asked Gangaji, is there an afterlife in your picture of things? He says, no, of course not. It's all black at death because there's no I. It's all created by the body mind. If you ask Buddha, when the Buddha was asked for, is there an afterlife? He would say, we can't know till after we die. So anything I would offer here would be a theory. So why don't you just wait till we see we die?
Yeah.
He would never say there's an absolute truth of anything, because everything is impermanently in flux 100% of the time.
It's just direct experience or nothing. Yeah,
exactly. He didn't take secondary positions about his paradigm. He was too busy living it. It wasn't until Buddhism moved to Chan and into China and Japan that the reason there's no I became a position.
Right, because it can't be an ism unless you have positions.
Right.
Exactly. You can't build an ism out of what are you directly experiencing right now.
Hinduism, Buddhism, and when I've heard Buddhisms and Hindus say we're not paradigms. Well, okay, let's have that schnapps. Let's get some schnapps on the table here now, or anisette, right? You just can't talk to people who hold their point of view in a closed fist of absolutism instead of an open hand of curiosity, right? You just can't.
Yeah, and I want to speak to the heartful outrage for a second. To own for me, because that's something I'm always watching on myself, because I certainly am a recovering smug intellectual. I have that in me, I admit. For me, it's either laugh or cry, and it's certainly easier to laugh, but there are moments where I certainly cry. And it also comes from me in aloneness of I want more people on the planet to that I relate with and also relate with each other, the people I don't even know, just to live a life that actually makes sense coherently to itself. And when you start learning to just even think this way, much less live this way, the paradigmatic incoherence is, oh my God, I start to feel terror inside when I really feel it. It's like bleeding nails on a chalkboard. It's the cause of so much suffering and so much pain and so much unnecessary heartache. And it's just because the vast majority of people are dead-ending, old, distorted, uncritical thinking paradigms. And it's just, it weighs on me every day of my life. And it's much easier to laugh than to cry about that.
Well said, Joseph. There are days, and this is important to include in our discussion here, as you just did so heartfully. I will spend days on and off, the whole days weeping exactly about what you're saying. Paradigmatic insobriety and paradigmatic collisions are the cause of 95% of suffering on the planet. What we're trying to do is come in from a very counterintuitive place and put an X-ray vision to the nature of paradigms, not as a way to smugly judge them, but as a way to unhook them, unplug them from human consciousness gradually and respectfully, so there's less suffering in the world. And when we laugh a bit here about the incoherency of gluten-free hosts, some of these things are comical.
It is funny.
They're just comical. And someone with an open heart sometimes just laughs about this. But if you laugh and don't cry, you're just a smug jerk. Get out of my sight, But if your pain, if some of the comedy comes out of your pain, That's just being the spectrum of consciousness with the capacity of human beings.
Yeah, it's like, it's not mean to laugh at a child who, tries to, I don't know, does something silly, like tries to hit a baseball while it's in their own hand or something. You can't help but laugh because of just the innocence of that.
Good metaphor.
Because kids fall, they do all sorts of crazy stuff. And just because we laugh at their folly doesn't mean we think they're, unworthy or lesser beings. They're just learning, and, klutziness is part of that.
So let me own something just like you just did.
Sure.
Every person I meet, I don't care what their paradigm is, that person knows how to be them one way or another. I don't know how to be them. They know how to be them. I don't know how to be them. And I cherish every human being I ever meet, now, in the past, now, and in the future, as showing me what I want to be more of or what I want to be less of. And that, to me, if we all did that, we would have a lot more communicative sobriety than we have now.
Yeah.
So every person I meet, no matter their belief system, is someone that I don't know how to be, and maybe I can learn something. I always have an open heart. I don't learn a whole lot from the majority of people I meet, because I can see through their paradigms in less than 10 seconds mostly. But maybe they know something about their paradigm that I could still learn. There's always something to learn from someone, always.
Sure. Yeah.
Right. So this is a meta context to our, if you're a little offended by how seemingly laughably comedic we are about some of the crazy notions and paradigms, come on, these paradigms came out of the axial age, a pre-psychological age, and they can't change. They can't evolve. Dogmatically bound religions and spiritual teachings can't evolve. Buddhism can't evolve beyond the I is an illusion.
Right, because let's say in Christianity, the cause of suffering is original sin. See Adam and Eve story, which you must believe is the literal truth, otherwise it won't make sense. Right. And then 120 years ago, you have, look, psychology, childhood wounding causes suffering, and here's exactly how. What's Christianity going to do with that? You can't just fold that in. No. Oh yeah, there's a second sin, the sins of the parents. Oh no, wait, you're supposed to honor your mother and father. Well, that's a direct contradiction. They have to be paradigmatically, bringing tears to my eyes too. They have to ignore all of psychology and hide the fact that they're ignoring it.
Yes,
they have to. Otherwise, the whole thing falls apart.
It's. I'm putting my fingers in my ears. La 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 la. And what astounds me, especially about Christianity, including Catholicism, is that they've went through this before with Galileo and Copernicus.
Yeah.
Sorry, another paradigm outgunned them, and they moved from from terracentricity to heliocentricity. But
right, it took them 400 years to admit they made a mistake or something,
and they threatened to excommunicate Galileo if he didn't recant. Right, so they've got to put that under the rug into their omerta, their silence. And not address it directly because they've been so spectacularly wrong.
They know their customers, like we talked about before with Soul Age, are looking for a very secure, rigid set of rules to make life safe feeling. And so if they start saying, I don't know too much, they're going to lose popularity.
They're going to lose their congregations, and can't have that and still have all that gold sitting in the vaults in Vatican City, right?
Yeah, can't lose all that tax-free revenue.
Right. So we're in the element of tax-free. Exactly.
Oh, yeah. I've seen financial aggregates of churches. Their profits are like 180%.
180%. Yep. Okay, so the basic value system, what this is good and what is bad. The next element in the tree of a paradigm is a set of ethical standards that adjudicate situational applications. I got to have are you ethical? Do you tell the truth? I can't help you ascertain whether if you're open to what is good and bad in your paradigm. Are you going to tell me the truth about what your real truth is, or are you going to spin it so as to be more acceptable to the conversation? There's one example there, right? You've got to have an ethical system that says this is good because and this is bad because.
Are we still on 6 or is this 7?
This is 7.
Okay.
It's the set of ethical standards or behaviors that express the basic value system.
Right. The good and bad, that's 6. This is the expression of that 7
right.
ethics.
Good and bad. It's good to kill. It's good to be alive. It's bad to be dead, unless you're going to heaven. Okay.
Right.
So
Which
now
I wanted to insert before. I'm sorry about suicide. I wanted to insert that before because Western medicine says that paradigmatically being alive is better than being dead. That's what justifies all the crazy measures they do in order to keep people alive as long as possible, even if their quality of life is poor.
It's CYA time. Make sure they don't get sued. And medicine, modern medicine is terrified of death.
Yeah,
terrified of it, and so do no harm. I'm sorry, the Hippocratic Oath is broken every single day in every hospital in the world. Every day.
Yeah, there's a paradigmatic rift for sure that's operating every day.
Okay, so it's good to be alive, it's bad to be dead. Therefore, if you kill someone, now we're in the realm of ethics, behaviors that express the good and bad of the belief system and the of the paradigm, right? Not that ethical standards. And finally,
don't kill, don't suicide, stay alive as long as you can. All of that are ethics,
right? And then you have to have a moral code, next element, 8th element, a moral code that adjudicates in sticky situation whether this behavior is good, expresses the good, or this behavior expresses the bad. There's got to be a moral code that says, okay, in situations like this, if you're stealing because your child is hungry, that's a different moral code than when it would say, all thieving is wrong. You see?
Okay, yeah, because I used to get confused. I still get confused the difference between morals and ethics because they're used synonymously sometimes. So you're saying, the ethics is killing is bad, and then the morals modifies the ethics as well. If someone attacks you and tries to kill you, then it's okay to kill them.
Yes, exactly. The moral code adjudicates conflicts in the ethical standards, and the ethical standards, going back up the ladder, represent the good and bad of the value system.
That's so cool. We should have been taught this in 8th grade. Wow.
This is not rocket science.
But then what would happen? You'd go home. The students would go home and challenge all of the ethics of their parents and split the whole thing wide open.
As I mentioned in an earlier podcast, I got shut down trying to help bringing joy to an emotion, legitimization of emotion, and the born again parents. Is colliding with our paradigm. They didn't say this, colliding with our belief system. Yeah. So I had to shut it down. Right?
Well, the tragic thing is you can't actually teach anything of value without colliding with someone's paradigm. That's why the species stays so stupid. Tragically.
And when I hear the word stupid, okay, just so listeners know,
it's not what I meant. I felt something else when I said stupid. But go ahead.
No, I'm going to legitimate it.
Yeah, I know.
I don't see stupid. I see stooped. Stupid.
Yeah.
They're stooped over. They're not standing erect in their heart and their mind and their clarity. Yeah. They're bent over. And that when you're bent over, you concave yourself instead of convex yourself. When you're convex, you're open to what life has to teach you. When you're concave, you're protective, right?
Yeah, and this
stupid.
Yeah, and it's tragic because people, they're not standing to their full height, and because these paradigms literally have them pretzeled. Because maybe this starts to answer the question of the if we ever get to the paradigmatic, if you live according to a distorted paradigm or do the cherry picking from multiple paradigms. It's like what happens when a tree tries to grow in a, when there's obstacles to it. It grows around it. It goes crooked over here. It goes crooked over there. It goes crooked over here. And then it can easily be blown over by the wind because it's not a healthy tree. It's not how we're supposed to be. We're supposed to be whole and have coherent paradigms. And we weaken ourselves when we try to embody these contradictions. We become an expression of those contradictions.
Yes.
But there's something I want to say. Oh, it made me think of when your wife Bree said about people wanting to change on their terms versus terms.
That's an oxymoron.
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah. Because Stace and I have both worked with lots of people trying to help them. And what you inevitably, and I think any therapist and lots of coaches would agree with this as well, when you try to help someone evolve, you eventually run into a paradigmatic problem, sometimes at the level of values. So
mostly at the level of values.
Mostly the level, right. So the public education is structured in a way, it's implicitly asking this question: what can we teach that would be valuable, that would be digestible to all people without challenging anyone's value system?
Lowest common denominator.
Exactly. And the answer is nothing very useful.
Yes.
Because as soon as you start talking about useful things, sex, money, relationships, relating with other people, management even, you run right into what's good and bad, how should we conduct ourselves, and that zips all the way up to where are we, why are we here, and what should we be doing with our lives?
Exactly.
You can't avoid it.
No, and that's so beautifully said. What I hear you saying in a heartfelt way. By the way, when you see the video of this, Joseph's eyebrows are like
they are
this,
going up.
Not like this. They're not
down.
Like this, right? Is that no growth, no vertical growth of consciousness happens unless value systems are confronted. Okay? Yeah. In other words, psychology can get away with it. They can say, okay, how can I help you, but stay within your value systems. Psychologists tend to be very timid this way. They're PC that way. They don't want to change anyone's values. They want to help you feel better in your life while you maintain your values. Mm-hmm. That's not technically true 100% of the time, but that's basically the teaching. You're not, if you start confronting people's values in your therapist's office, you're heading up a therapeutic cult then, right. Because you're not being egalitarianly supportive of. You're not there to put anything on that client. You're supposed to help them find their own inside their value system. In our picture of things, that's fine. That works. If you want to stop smoking and learn how to communicate better with your spouse, that's fine.
If it didn't help at all, they wouldn't be doing it.
Right. But we're talking about the meaning of life here. Yeah. The paradigm determines the quotient of what's your meaningfulness of life standard. Mm-hmm. And in that sense, growth can't happen till, again, we give the room at the other end. Stick with what you throw all this podcast stuff out that we're talking about. Stick with what you're doing until it dead ends. And maybe you'll need help knowing it's dead ended. You haven't really confronted the dead end, like the guy with the Catholicism who didn't want to get divorced. He didn't know he hit a dead end there, but he had. That's why he was so confused. Yeah. No value changes, no meaningfulness of life factor change. And that goes right to a point I want to make in this at this tier of our moral code, is that the moral code that you live with, that's part of this whole paradigm, assigns you a CQ factor, which is consciousness quotient. Consciousness quotient. You can have a ton of IQs stuck between your ears and have a very low CQ when you have high IQ.
Often those are correlated. High IQ often correlates with low CQ.
Just look at born again politicians.
I have a saying in the business coaching that I do. I find doctors, lawyers, engineers, and accountants, people who have a lot of technical training, they become very intelligent, but it narrows their consciousness field, so they have difficulty thinking in inferential ways.
Yeah, if you have a high IQ, in this world, you're rewarded to have low CQ.
Yes,
we're trying to elevate CQ here in this discussion about paradigms. That's the main goal here. Become conscious of all the ways you've got yourself tied in knots, but don't know it, because you've been so conditioned to tie yourself in knots that you don't know you're tied in knots. And there's a whole consciousness spectrum waiting for you to experience it that's locked out of your awareness when you don't have curiosity about the natures of your beliefs. So this is the whole meta context of this podcast.
Yeah.
In that way.
And so back to the terms thing I wanted to mention, it's what people coming from choose your paradigm, shadow, ego, what we'll talk about as being green at some point, defense systems, people, they want to change the results in their life, their outer circumstances, or their internal state without having to change who they are.
Yes.
Without having to change their values, without having to change their ethics, without having to change their cosmogony, their picture, all of that. And the answer is you can't.
You can't.
You can't, because they're inextricably intertwined, and that's the power of the 9 elements of the paradigm that is so amazing.
Beautifully said.
It shows exactly how your picture of the very nature of reality trickles downstream into the results you have or don't have in your life. And as long as you're in that box, if it's limited, then your results will be limited too. And you have to change, not on your terms, but on the terms of, well, if I let go of this long-held belief, this long-held value, well, who am I then? Yeah, yes. That's exactly what you have to face.
That's exactly right. You got to get naked. You got to take off all your belief clothes, all your values that have dead-ended you, or else you wouldn't be seeking help.
Yeah.
So you can't change clothes here. You have to get naked.
Yes.
And then see what clothes are drawn to you as expressions, forms and expressions of your being. The deeper you strip down to essentials, which is very, very difficult for most people to ever do, to let go that far, then they think they're being cultized, which is another whole.
And that's
right.
That's the problem, because if you mandate someone get naked, that's what cultists do.
That's exactly right.
But that has more to do with how it's done rather than whether it's done or not.
Yes.
Which we'll get to next episode.
Our ninth term. I added this term. It used to be 8, but I made it 9 because a summary of all the other 8 elements is explainable by the basic assumptions you have about human consciousness. And that goes down to I blank, therefore I blank statements. Mm-hmm. Right? I have original sin, therefore I am forever tainted. That is all of Christianity and most of Islam, also, and Judaism, of course. There's an original sin is a really weird thing in Islam. It's hinted at, but not really talked about.
It's vague. But I just thought of like basic assumptions, like men are, and here's an easy one, women are. So the very poor patriarchal reputation that women have in our society is very easily zipped all the way up to Adam and Eve.
Yes.
Right.
Sure.
That's where it comes from in Judeo-Christianity. Exactly. And so then that's where it's really weird, where if someone thinks women are less than men, how that got into them came through the conditioning of Adam and Eve.
Yes.
Which they don't even necessarily believe in, but that's how it's all wired up. It's wild how that can happen.
Yeah. Whole cultures and societies can be conditioned by religious teachings without knowing they've been conditioned by religious teachings.
Yeah. Even atheists and agnostics.
They throw the baby out with the bathwater. They take religion so seriously as talking for God that they kind of go all the way to the other side, right? Mm-hmm. So these basic assumptions about the human conditions, which come from the value systems, but they're bottomed out. When you hit the bottom of the cellar here of what is your orientation to consciousness? I think, therefore I am. I is an illusion, therefore I am not. What is your existential statement that is part of your paradigm? It's almost like the sum at the bottom and the basic cause that goes right back up to the top. Mm-hmm. It sort of spirals right back in some sort of circular way. That your basic assumptions about the nature of consciousness. I am a product of my mind, therefore I have a limited time on earth, and I die when my consciousness dies. When my consciousness dies when I die. gives away I think, therefore I am, right?
Mm-hmm.
So these kinds of things, if someone who's really interested in becoming as whole a being as they can, which means they have to get naked and increase their CQ, if you take them through, like the blueprint that we use in personhood, Joseph, you take them through and reveal through, only take 3, 4, 5 sessions for most people, to take them through these elements and give them an assay of the sobriety or insobriety, contradictional or silly, childish fairy tales or felt truths in them, not artificially put in. You can take someone through these 9 elements and help them grow in CQ.
Yeah, and symptoms may include nausea, dizziness, existential distress, confusion,
ostracization from your family, from your friends, from your community. Don't dare to start thinking independently.
But this is all, it already is going on. Like I had a client who got off of alcohol a while back, and he lost all of his friends because they didn't want to hang out with him because they didn't drink anymore. So we already hang out with people who resonate with us at the level of some values. We're just calling for, hey, are you clear about what those are? And are those values you really, really subscribe to? Just while you were talking a minute ago, I didn't realize when we were going to talk about the spiritual buffet thing, which is, I guess, where we should go next. I get why now you wanted to talk about the 9 elements, because you can't talk about the buffet thing without talking about the 9 elements first. We've already talked about 80% of it. Now we just got to do the icing on the cake. Yes. We've already talked a little bit about it.
And that is a good 90 minutes right there, though, still, as we'll see.
Oh, really?
Yeah, it will go that way, I promise.
Okay, well, let's touch upon it.
Yeah. So the whole paradigmatic thing, I want to make one other point, which we'll continue in the next one, about spiritual buffet. And that is that, and this is the headline, because we don't have that much time left. The headline is, most people would say, wait, you two, aren't all the problems of the world, I'll say it another way. The problem is not with your paradigms. The problem is how absolutely you grip your paradigms. Mm-hmm. In other words, when we get to taking an element from this paradigm and matching with that paradigm and trying to make it together into a whole, the premise behind that is adherence to one paradigm-ism is causing most of the religious sufferings in the world. If you only have one paradigm and you can't cherry pick from, look at all these other good paradigms, if I put it together in my own personal way, then I'll be way better off here. I'll find myself that way. And we would like to offer, Joseph and I, that's how you lose yourself even more. And that the headline is, the answer to the problems of over attachment to one paradigmism is not multi-paradigms. The problem in one paradigmism is the absolute way they hold their truths. Mm-hmm. That's the problem, not one paradigmism. If Edenity offers, here's a paradigm that includes all the other ones, honors every other one out there you can find in Edenity. There's good in all paradigms. It separates the wheat from the chaff and says, come test this. We don't hold all of our truths in Edenity with an absolute basis. We hold it with an open hand. Show us contradiction. Show us where this doesn't fit. Because there's 3 elements that you discuss, that you can reveal the sobriety or coherency, in your case, of a paradigm. And that is, one, they cannot contradict, one element in it cannot contradict another element. That's the first one, right? The second one is, all of the elements that you do hold in your paradigm must be held non-absolutely. Mm-hmm. There's nothing that anyone can ever say as a human being that they know absolutely true. That alone is a paradigm shatterer. No human being can know absolute truth. None, right? And the last one is to determine if your paradigm is sober. Is how well does it explain? How well does it replace the paradigm you had as explaining the human condition to you better than the paradigm you hold? In other words, heliocentricity replaced terracentricity.
Explain more phenomena, right?
It explained more phenomenon. So that last element is a sober element has to show itself to explain reality better than the one it seeks to replace.
It has to be an improvement, not just a lateral move.
Right. It's got to, or else CQ doesn't increase. Right.
People do that sometimes. People sometimes go from a sophisticated paradigm, albeit confused, to a less sophisticated one. I've seen that.
Yeah, I've seen brilliant scientists become born again Christians.
Yeah, right. Mm-hmm.
Because they've had an emotional break of some kind.
And, it's understandable because there's not a whole lot of emotional support in scientism.
That's right. So let's sum up here, Mr. Joseph Mann.
Wait, hold on a second. Are you saying we're going to have to do a whole other episode on the spiritual buffet thing, that we haven't sufficiently covered it?
Or we haven't mentioned even half of it.
Wow, okay. Cool. Okay. That's why you're the talent and I'm the host.
Okay. I promise we'll have, even if it's 62 minutes, it'll be, it's
okay, cool. Yeah, because I've got questions about what it actually does to people. Great. Yeah. Okay, so let's sum up today then.
Yeah. So our next one, I'll say one more thing for what you just said. Mm-hmm. The next one will be how to make hay while the sun shines with everything we talked about today. It's where the rubber meets the road, right? We had to first outline the whole system before we could say, here's how to apply it in everyday human life. Right? So what we're summarized today is something, as Joseph so beautifully said at the beginning, should have been taught to us in at least 7th grade before you went to high school, and then have advanced courses in high school, the nature of paradigms. Humans cannot live without a paradigm. Animals live without paradigms. Yeah. They're just action reaction. They have minds, they do, but they're not aware they have minds like human beings. Mm-hmm. And so what it boils down to is we're not just animal. We have a mind that's lateral to existence, but we also are vertical to our mind. We have a way to look at our mind, which is we're aware of our self-awareness. That awareness of self-awareness requires paradigmatic maps. If you don't have a paradigmatic map and just say, I'm an animal, I only act and react, then you can't even have any one opinion that you feel is right, because everything is in flux at all moments. The point being is human beings, because they're aware, we're self-aware, we need maps. That's not a reductionism of our soul or our heart or our spirit. It's what's required.
Wow. So you're saying a paradigm is as intrinsic an aspect of a human being as a hand is, or a nose. It's because it's a artifact of our very consciousness.
It is, wow. But it's a critical artifact.
Yeah.
The paradigm of a bird, they will all it involves is building a nest. It's all survival based.
Yeah.
When you're aware that you're aware, you're interested in thrival. How can I make things better? Not just at action reaction, but in consideration.
Right. I'm spending all my time looking for food. Like there's got to be a better way that requires awareness of awareness.
They don't have time to create paradigms like we do. They're busy surviving, and but we have that nature in us. We have an animal nature of that, but we've got something they don't have. We're aware. We're self-aware, and the proof, and why we need paradigms, is because the proof that we're different than animals that way is that animals don't commit suicide.
Yeah. Yeah.
We do. Mm-hmm. We commit suicide because we have despair about the meaning of life. Animals are aware, they love, they fear, they know death is coming, they can sense it, they're afraid, but they don't commit suicide because they don't have any other alternative way to live. Whereas aware you are self-aware, that means we need paradigmatic maps to give us meaning. It doesn't mean the paradigm is an artifact, artificial. It's the way we have to navigate human existence.
Yeah, a structural feature is a better term than artifact.
Structural feature. And so what we talked about today was the elements of paradigms. And we want to end with here today, and I'm done with my side here, is how required they are for beings who are aware that they're self-aware.
Yeah, that's a lot to chew on. I mean, I've never heard you talk about that, how paradigms are actually, that means they're an essential feature, and not just, we talked about this before, I think, how all human beings are philosophers, whether they realize it or not. And this is why, because you have to have a paradigm, you can't not have one, and you can't not test it.
Right.
Therefore, you can't not dead end. Therefore, you can't not learn. And then you can't not evolve. And that's the mandate.
And you don't evolve, then you don't have even a modicum of CQ, right?
Right.
At least for all her goofiness, Ayn Rand spoke to the necessity of paradigms in so many words in her objectivistic, her teaching books, not her novels. She talked about the necessity for a worldview, and that it's perfectly human to do it, even though she was an atheist, which artificializes at another whole level. But even in a spirit-based paradigm, we need paradigms, even as spiritual beings having human experience. We need paradigms. When we die, we don't need paradigms because the paradigm, which we can never know while we're alive fully, is presented to us without a whole lot of filters. And so while we're here, we need these. And the whole point of it, last point, I promise, is Edenity tentatively and cautiously offers that its paradigm will set it up for you to have your afterlife experience while you're still alive. That's a big claim. We don't want you to believe it. We just want you to test it, like any good scientific orientation. So that's what made today worthwhile for me to talk about. And thank you so much for your always, you're the best interviewer I've ever had.
Oh, thank you.
That's it. That's it.
I had a ton of fun today. I didn't even know we were going to talk about the 9 elements. This is one of my top 3 most favorite things to talk about. So I could do it for hours. I want to write a whole book about the 9 elements one day.
I only have 1 chapter and 1 book about paradigms.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, forget 7th grade, where it would challenge people too much. What about philosophy 101 in college? Like, hey, you're going to learn a bunch of different philosophies. Here's the anatomy of them. I mean, it just makes perfect sense. And
sure.
Yeah.
If there's no comparative paradigmatism in college.
They have comparative religions, but inside the collegiate everything is equal thing, you can't cut with too sharp a blade. Otherwise, you'd be accused of not being woke enough these days.
Exactly.
How dare you be judgmental? And because if you look too close, you start to see the contradictions, and now you're a racist or, a whateverist, and you can't do that.
I love what you just said. When someone says, you're being so judgmental, they're being judgmental in that moment. I mean, I remember it becomes a merry-go-round of hilarity.
Yeah. I mean, I think I went to college and I think like the beginning of the heyday of political correctness. I was in college from 93 to 92 to 96. And I remember the first freshman seminar I took was an anthropology one, and we read this book that was an ethnography of this obscure culture in like Papua New Guinea or something, where they did this ritual where somebody would have these wings on them and people were putting out torches on their back and burning this person horribly, and it just looked like this primitive, tribal, grotesque display. And then the whole point of the book was, by the end, you understood that ritual made perfect sense
inside of their world.
And so, but the sort of implicit point of the of the course was you got an A if you saw that our culture here in the US is just as arbitrary as that culture.
Yes.
And that's the paradigm of anthropology. Like, if you stand in the right spot, it's all pretty much the same. Who cares?
Yes.
And we're saying, like, yes, and you can also hierarchicalize it because some is realer or truer than others. I forget what you're using.
Both. We could go both ways.
Yeah.
It's true for you. What's true for you, flat earthism, might not be real.
Yeah.
So real is the base tone rubric, and true is what you feel is real.
So this is what makes this, it's like I always feel the pressure of the zeitgeist when we talk about this kind of stuff, because right now the culture is moving in a direction of more egalitarianism and forget what's true.
Yes.
And this flies in the face of that.
Yes.
So it always makes me a little nervous when I talk with people about this kind of stuff, because I don't want people to feel judged or anything. But again, like we were saying, people can't really change. They can't really improve their situation if they're not willing to look at their paradigms with a harsh light.
It's been 40 years. I've been trying to get this paradigm out, 38 years technically. And it's spitting into the wind. You have to spit into the wind, and you got to assume some of your own spit's going to come back to you, because the wind is don't make me more conscious. I don't want to be more conscious, because then I'll lose my family. I'll lose my belief system. I'll lose my community. I'll lose my place in society, whatever it is. Don't make me more conscious, please.
Yeah.
And we're saying, oh, sorry. Okay, then stick with what you're sticking with, and we'll talk to you in a couple lifetimes, maybe, or maybe not. Maybe we're wrong, and you're all right. Maybe was an Adam and Eve, and maybe to fear God is not an oxymoron. Maybe. If that's the case, then it's the backyard eternal barbecue for me. That's for sure. I'm willing to bet not my life. I'm betting my afterlife.
Yeah.
On this paradigm, because I remember pre-Stace Barron. I remember past lives. I remember what the afterlife is like. And that either makes me crazy, or let's hear what this guy has to say up to a certain point anyway, before I get pissed off at him, So what are you going to do? One day, one lifetime, you got to go big or go home. This is that one for me.
Yeah.
So
for me too.
I know, that's why it's so wonderful to know you.
Likewise. I wouldn't be able to do it without you. And after having met you, I did try to go back and completely failed. I dead-ended several paradigms after meeting you.
Which was what you needed to do.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. And we'll eventually talk about that.
Yeah.
But anyway, yes, I'm toast. Let's close here.
Me too.
Thank you so much, Stace. This was riveting for me. And thanks for listening. And until next time, we wish you well on your journey. Thanks for listening to the Heart of Soul podcast. To learn more about Stace Barron and Edenity, please visit edenity.org. To learn more about Joseph Shapiro, visit clearandopen.com. Until next time, we wish you well on your journey.